Hi, my name is Ella, and here's a story of the time that my family went over to Australia to visit family, and it ended up not being pleasant for these reasons which I will explain. I will first tell you that there's my mother Kelly, who's well in her 40s, about 5'3", and quite frightened at a lot of things. My dad Brian, who's a strong believer in the paranormal, and loves scary things. He's about 5'8", strong build. There's my sister, Alex, 20 years old. Not much to say about her, other than I personally find her annoying most of the time. It's always like a competition with her. Lastly, me, Katie, who's 15, 5'4", female, and I kind of have the same personality as my dad. Anyway, we were all so excited to be making a trip to the land down under. My parents had been saving up hard for a while to be able to go over there. My uncle lives over there with his girlfriend, and has now for about 15 years. We were ecstatic to be seeing them. My mother told me most of the plans were for when we were over there. One of them included a road trip in the outback. I'm a very paranoid person, and the thought of all the things that could possibly go wrong were making me feel ill, even though I was still very excited. Mixed emotions, I know. But the thing that scared me the most was thinking about the show Wolf Creek. For those who don't know, it's a show about a serial killer in the outback who acts friendly to people, then kills them, while trying to play a game of cat and mouse. This terrified me, and I'm sure it did to my dad too, since he also watched. It's a very gory, horrible show. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody with a weak stomach. I mean, I wish I never watched it. I'll skip forward, past all the getting over there, getting settled in and whatnot. I'll begin on the day of the road journey. It was 6 of us going all together, along with my uncle's dog, who's very gentle, and also getting quite old. The vehicle we were traveling in was an old RV, which my uncle and dad both rented, going half on the money. I was excited. I packed all my things I needed, even brought a small pocket knife, since I told you, I'm already paranoid. It was 5 a.m. We got up, and it was still dark out. It took us a good hour to get going, so we left around 6. We finally left the house, and I knew this was going to be quite the adventure. My uncle drove the RV, but my dad and him were taking turns. We had a map in case we got too lost, which of course will come in handy. Australia is a very big place, and even my uncle, who's lived there for well over 15 years now, could easily get lost. I think it took us around 2 hours to eventually enter the dry, empty desert roads. There was only a few small cars driving by, every so often, but not much people at all. I charged my MP3 player, so I just plugged in my headphones and listened to some music to try and calm my nerves. The thought of anything going possibly wrong was just too much. We stopped off a bunch of times to take in the view, get pictures of kangaroos in the distance. When I looked down the road, you could clearly see the heat rising, causing a mirage. I thought that was pretty cool. It was really hot. I'd guess if you stayed out here long enough, you could die. We got back on the road again and drove for hours and hours. I think it was around 9 p.m. when it started to get dark. It was really beautiful when it was dark. The sky was full of stars. I remember taking a few photos of them. It was fully dark now, and my dad was driving at this point. I was talking to my mother and my aunt about how beautiful it was being out here, and how this was such an experience. My aunt began telling me stories about creepy things that happen out in the desert. She's a wise person. She's the type who knows a lot of things that can't be explained. I felt safer with her out on the road. Definitely. But not gonna lie, the stories she was telling me about the unexplained things out in the desert were starting to scare me. But I didn't let her know that. I just listened in awe to her. She told me a story that I was interested in. A story about the Min Min lights. Basically, Min Min is a light phenomenon that has often been reported in the outback of Australia. Stories about the lights can be found in Aboriginal myths, predating European settlement, and have been part of a wider Australian folklore. She told me how it believed that the Min Min lights are the spirits of the dead Aborigines, whose souls lie in the outback still. It didn't make me scared. I found it more fascinating and spiritual. I sat back, tried to relax again. I must have fallen asleep, because when I woke up, it was 2:30 in the morning. My sister and mom were asleep, but my uncle, dad, and aunt were all awake, talking. My aunt came over to me, and we're just talking about random stuff. It was nice, though, as she's a good listener. We looked out the window of the RV, and it was magical outside. More stars than I have ever seen. I eventually fell back asleep on the pull-out chair, and it was not comfortable. My uncle was still driving, and my aunt and dad were asleep now too. I awoke again at 4 a.m. I don't know why I woke up so suddenly, but it felt like it was from a sound or something. My heart was beating so fast. I calmed myself down, went to reach for my water, and gulped down a lot of it. I said hello to my uncle, who was clearly exhausted from driving, and he started talking with me. I made him some coffee for his troubles of staying awake, sat back down, and just looked out the window again in awe at the mysterious wonders of the sky. Wait, what? What's that in the sky? I said in a shaky voice. He stopped the RV, parked it at the side of the road, by how shaken up I sounded. Everyone else was still asleep. My uncle approached me near the window as I peered out. He took one look at what I was looking at, and his eyes widened, screaming at me to get down. He ran over to my aunt, who was asleep, to wake her up. I felt dizzy, and I was overwhelmed. I didn't know what was happening. I seen my aunt get up, seeming very confused. My uncle whispered to her, but loud enough that I could hear. "The Min Min lights," he said. She got up straight away, started closing the blinds. I remembered the story she told me, and that's when I actually began to feel sick and scared. I was terrified. I know this was dumb to do, but I was curious to look out the window. So I peered out, and that's when I saw it. These big balls of bright light were heading toward us from a distance. I said to my aunt, "They're not going to do us any harm, are they?" And that's when she explained to me they can, and they will. My uncle told us that we needed to get out, now. He sat back in the driver's seat. There was silence, and he also exclaimed and said no. When I asked what is it, he's not really sure. He told us all that the engine would not start. I felt like crying. All my fears hit me like a brick. My aunt told me and my uncle that we all needed to go out to the back of the RV and use the spare fuel. It was safer that the three of us go. I remember fear taking over me. I don't think I was ready for this. The three of us had to do it, or else we weren't getting out of there. We all crept out into the pitch black of the outback, with only a small torch providing us with any amount of light. We crept quietly. There was a bunker underneath it where the fuel was stored. The sound of crickets stopped, and the entire outback fell into silence. My uncle told me not to look behind me, but of course I couldn't resist. When I did, I seen balls of light getting closer. I told my uncle to hurry up with putting the fuel in. He was nearly done, and my aunt was hugging me, as she knew I was scared, just as much as she was. Then I heard something behind me. I froze with a bad gut feeling. I whispered to my aunt, telling her that I had heard something. We both turned around in silence, holding our breath. I could hear my uncle's dog barking very loud in the RV. He was very much in distress, and I'm surprised my parents or sister did not wake up. I almost screamed, but my aunt stood behind me, holding my waist, and put her hand around my mouth. These two tall, lanky figures were walking toward us. They were in the dark abyss, heading toward us slowly. Humans? No. They were freakishly tall, and their bodies misshaped and weird. The Min lights had disappeared, and I wondered if these figures were the spirits of the lights. My uncle stood up, told us he was done. We didn't reply, as I guess we were both in shock. My uncle told us to get back into the RV now. I couldn't move or speak. I wanted to scream and cry, but I just stood there, staring at these figures getting closer, their eyes glowing white. Their arms were very skinny and bony, and their heads were this very strange shape. I could feel energy building up in my body, my own blood pressure rising, and I was stuck not being able to move with my eyes locked on these creatures' glowing eyes. I felt myself being dragged, and I think it was my uncle trying to get me and my aunt into the RV. We were put back inside, and he put us on the couch. I remember feeling weak and dizzy, and felt myself losing consciousness as my ears continued to ring, a very high-pitched shrill. I don't know how long I was out, but I finally got up to see my aunt still asleep, and my parents and sister now awake. We were in a small town now. It was our destination. I was confused as we were only on the road for about 11 hours, but to get to our destination, it would have taken us 3 days. My mom, sister, and father came over to me, hugged me, and asked if I was okay. I said, "Why are we already here?" My uncle said to my parents that, "Yeah, I told you she was pretty ill and was asleep for 2 days." I couldn't believe it. My mind was racing with questions. I remember hugging them and didn't argue. When we got out into the town, my uncle held me back, and I asked him one question. Was it real? He told me yes, it was, and that he could never let my parents know. All in all, it was one of the craziest, most supernatural experiences I've ever had in my life. And what those beings were, I don't know. Do I think they would have done me harm had they gotten close to me? I didn't want to find out. Who knows what hex or evil they put on me that caused me to feel dizzy, weak, and lose consciousness. I can't even imagine what they would have done to me had they gotten close to me. I'm glad I never found that out.